First thing that we're going to look at on our scene file here is how could we create a fade in. Now we're going to look at how to do titles and transitions here in Adobe Animate, and then we will repeat the same process and do titles and transitions inside of Adobe Premiere video editor and see how we can do things in two different programs in two different ways, and then you can decide which is the way that you want to roll forward with it. There isn't a right or wrong, there is just different. Sometimes people like to do everything all in one program, others don't mind jumping between different pieces of software to produce their final output. So if I want to create a fade onto my movie, what I can notice is this blue box shows me that is my finished camera view. So as we go through the video, we'll see how that blue box is where my video will be outputting. So if I want to create a fade into this scene, what I can do is I am going to add a new layer. And onto this new layer, I am going to draw a box. So this box that I am going to draw is going to have no stroke. So I'll click on the stroke color next to the little pencil icon, and right where up top where it says alpha 100, next to that you see a box that has a little red line through it that indicates nothing. So I want no stroke, and then I want to set my fill. In this case we can make it whatever color we want, but because I'm going to be doing a fade from black or a fade to black, I'm going to choose black as the color of choice. So I'm using the rectangle, no stroke, black fill, and I'm going to draw a rectangle that is at least as big as my movie. I could make it exactly the same size, or I can make it a little bit bigger or smaller, doesn't really matter. But I'm going to just make that box there. The next thing that I'm going to do is with the selection tool, I'm going to select this black shape that I have drawn, and I am going to convert this to a symbol. Now as far as what kind of symbol we create, it's not too important as to which one, because all we're going to be doing is modifying the alpha or transparency of this symbol as we work with it. So I can make it a graphic, or I can make it a movie clip. We'll just stick with graphic right now. Now as I have this symbol here and I look at that, what I want to do is right click on it and create a classic tween. So I've made artwork, converted it to a symbol, now I'm going to start tweening, and now I want, say, to do a half-second fade up from black. So I'm at black, now I want to fade. Oh, the camera's moving, I forgot. We have the camera moving here. So we'll have to move the box as well so it stays with the camera at least, so we don't lose. Oh, and I moved my frame over. There we go. So now my black box stays with the camera, but at this new keyframe what I want to do is to modify in the properties of that box the color effect. And when I look in the color effect, we'll see brightness, tint, advanced, and alpha. Alpha is the transparency or opacity of the box, and to modify the alpha of this box, I can click on alpha. We see it defaults at 75. I'm going to just pull it down to about 10%. Now the reason I don't pull it down to 0% and instead pull it down to 10 is that way I can see that that box is still there, and on the next frame after this, so I've animated this, you can see how it fades, revealing the scene. And on the next frame, to make it go away, I am going to insert an empty keyframe. Now, to insert that empty keyframe, I'm going to use the function key F7 on my keyboard, and that now makes it go away. If I want to add in my title, I can put it over the top of the box while the movie is fading in, so then the scene can fade in while the title is there, and then the title can fade out afterward, and we can make that happen. So to demonstrate that, and I'm going to go through a couple of different scenarios of how we might want to handle doing titles. One important thing to notice is it says scene 1 up here, because what we will look at in a little bit is how we can add in a title scene and a credit scene, which then makes it a little bit easier to manage these sorts of things. But if I wanted to put some text on my scene here with it and make it more than just boring text, because if I just choose boring text, so I grab the text tool and choose a font that's going to be a little bit more appropriate, and I figured the font that makes sense based on what this animation is, I should choose something like Impact because that fits with the animation. And I will just choose generic white as part of that. As I go to put the text on screen, I will see in my text options we also have an option for, say, centering, which can be useful. Then if I put my cursor close to the middle of the screen here, I can now type in my title. And as we're looking, we'll see that it's not very big yet at the moment on my overall screen, so I may want to size that up. So we can size it up into a much larger impact. Now, if I'm going to be animating my text here, we can see how it moves. Well, technically it's not moving at all. It's staying in place because the camera is moving. It would probably be useful if my camera didn't start moving right away, but because it is, and that's what we're rolling with, we'll continue working with it. So I can do text as text, and I can do the same kinds of fades. If this is a symbol, I can do lots of different things to it. So if I right click, we'll see I can just choose convert to symbol, and I can convert this to a symbol. So if I wanted to do more creative effects, which I'll demonstrate in a moment, we can certainly do that, or more artistic ones or hand-drawn ones. We can create those as part of what we're doing. But now that this is a symbol and I can classic tween it, first thing I want to do is to set it up so that it follows the same overall placement on screen. Looks like I need to adjust the vertical position a little bit. Okay, that's close enough. And now that the text has lined up, as we're zooming out, I'm going to take that as an opportunity to fade the text. So I can insert another keyframe, and then once I've put in that keyframe, I can go into my color effect and choose alpha, and we'll see how it now fades out. And if I don't want it to start on screen solid, I can go a few frames in to soften that and insert a keyframe, then go back to the first keyframe, select the symbol, and modify its alpha so it starts out faded. So it fades up, and then it's going to fade out as part of the movie. And then once it fades out, then we can insert an empty keyframe to terminate the artwork for that layer. So this is one way that we can add in the titles and control the titles as part of it. It's relatively easy and straightforward to do so. We also could set it up so that if I wanted to create hand-drawn titles, with this, with hand-drawn titles, I could even animate this, and I could do it frame by frame. So after I've inserted my first frame, I can go to the next frame, and I'm hitting F7 each time. And each time I hit F7, I'm adding one more line. And you will notice that as I do this, I'm going to have to go back and do some scaling to some of these and repositioning because the letters are disappearing off screen. So it is something that if I scrub back through this animation, now this is not the kind of animation I would create inside of, say, Premiere. So as we build this animation, if I want to start scaling it and repositioning it with the camera, it just helps me to realize that I really do wish that I didn't have the camera moving during this initial part. But it is what it is, and since we're going to be rolling with it, now I can work on lining things up. And what we can do to help see that is to turn on onion skinning, and then I can work on lining up as part of onion skinning to help set up what is happening within the project. And when you're trying to put things on screen, it can sometimes be useful as you do it to use, as I'm trying to drag, it doesn't quite snap where I want, and then I can use the arrow keys to more precisely align my content on screen, because sometimes as it goes to snap, it does not want to behave and is lining up incorrectly. So we can use the arrow keys to get a little more precision in what we're doing as we line it up. But we can see how it is creating animation and lining it up. And this type of animation is something I really couldn't do very readily inside of Premiere or After Effects. It's something that is, you need a more dedicated animation program to do it. But sometimes the end results of doing something like this outweigh the effort, because it gives you that better finished product that you will be happier with, because it now achieves the look and feel that you're aiming for in your project. So when you are animating, you should think about combining all different techniques and not restricting yourself to only using one style or kind or method of animation, but instead look at how you can use all the tools that are at your disposal to create your end result. And for this one, I had to zoom in so I could more precisely and accurately select my stroke. Now, if I turn off onion skinning and start moving through the frames, we can see how the text draws itself on screen, and then after it's there, then I could reverse the process, erasing it out, or once it shows up, let it exist for a few frames, and then I can even just hit F7 and make it go away, because we don't have to have everything be a fade as we work with it. One other thing to keep in mind as you are doing things like this, I turned off the text layer that I used to animate using the actual type tool and font characters. So I turned it off, but if I were to look at my project and test out the movie, we can see that it shows up. So that tells me that I might want to do something different. I could delete it if I didn't want it, but if we have layers that we don't want to delete but we don't want to see them anymore, just turning off their eyeball is not enough to stop them from publishing. We need to modify the layer property, and we can do that by right-clicking and choosing properties, or double-clicking on the layer. And within a given layer, if we change the layer type to a guide layers don't publish in finished projects. It also changes the icon of the layer from the page with the corner turned, so it now looks like a T-square. And when we do that, now if I test my movie, we'll see that that other text layer is not there. So bird impact shows up. Probably should have been timed out a little bit slower. Everything should be most likely a double frame, not a single frame, so that it plays a little slower and smooth. But that would require relining things up, so I'm not going to go into that process at the moment. So I've turned off the two existing title layers that I have here. I will leave the animated one in my finished project just so we can see that when we render out the video. But another way to add in a title or a credit scene, so maybe I'll leave the title and I'll make some credits right now, is under the window pull down menu there's an option called scene. When I choose that, it pulls up this little palette here, and inside this window we'll see that there is an option to add a scene, the little page with the corner turned icon. So before I add a scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click where it says scene 1 and rename it. And the reason I'm doing this is that way when I add in my new scene, we'll do a credit scene and a title scene. So when I add in a new scene, then I can see what it is and see the order that they're going to play. So I've added in two scenes to my project. I have the main movie, now added in a title scene and a credits scene. An important part about this is these scenes will play in the order that we see them on screen here. So my main movie will play, then it will play my title scene, then it will play my credits scene. If I want to change that order, I just click on the one and drag it up. Just like changing the order of layers, I change the order of my scenes. So if you've set it up correctly, you should see your title scene, your main movie, and then your credits scene. And once you've set that up, then we can start adding in content to those scenes. Well, see up at the top left corner, it now identifies which scene we are currently inside of. And it's telling me that I am inside my title scene. So I'm going to minimize that window because I don't need it right now, and pair it up. I have my color swatches over there. I'm going to make a title, but I can see that currently the color is white. And if I look over in the property window, it tells me that my main stage color is white. So I'm going to modify that to black so I can put text on top of black, fade in from black, fade out to black, and just make everything look all super awesome in my project. My three scenes here, I am going to start out in my title scene, and I'll notice that my stage color is white. Now the stage color is the stage color through your entire project. I could leave it white, I could draw a black box, put it over the whole thing to make it black, then put my text on top of that and go for it. Or I can just be lazy and just switch my main stage color to black so it's done. That way, when I go to my credit scene, I have a black background. In my main movie, that black background doesn't show because we've put artwork on top of it anyway. And then, and then we have our poor bird that hits the window. And then we'll have to fade that scene out in a moment. So going back into my title scene over here, I am ready to put in some text. And as I'm going to put that text on screen, I'll just zoom in so I can see the text when I type it. I'll grab my text tool once more. Now, this is another opportunity where I could hand animate, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to use the text tool, and I am going to put in some text. Your title can be whatever you want it to be. So now I have my text on screen. And with the text, if I turn the text into a symbol, then I can fade it in, I can fade it out. Now the funny thing about text is if I do nothing and I don't convert it to a symbol, if I put that text on this layer and I choose Classic Tween, it technically converted this text into a symbol for me. So now if I go out, let's see, we'll fade it in over the course of, well, we'll do more than just fade. We'll do a little fade and scale and make it, have a little bit of fun with it. So this is how I want the text when it comes in, and I want that to happen over, about a half second. So I'll go over to frame, we'll go over to frame 12 here, and at this point I will put in a keyframe. So I hit F6, that puts in a keyframe. Now I go back to frame 1, and I'm going to take this text, and with that text I'm going to modify its alpha, and then I'm going to use the transform tool, and this is where it'll get fun, and I'm going to start it out really big. So what's going to happen is the text is going to go from a zoom down to standard size. Now, something else that we can do as part of our tweens here, we do have options, so we can do easing if we want. So we could, ease in so that it starts it a little bit slower and then speeds up as it goes to further build that impact. And now when I watch that, I realize at playback speed it's too slow, so I'm going to shorten that up a little bit because I want it to have a little snap as part of it. And I think that's closer to what I want. And then I'll decide to leave it on screen as is. So if I know it's at about frame 6, 24 frames is 1 second. So this is something we could probably read over the course of 1 second. So really somewhere around frame 30, I can insert a keyframe. And then I go over a couple frames, and I'm going to have it snap out as well. Since it went in fast, it's going to go out even faster. Then I'll hit F6. And again, using the transform tool, I'm going to make it really big. And then modify the color effect so the alpha fades out. So if I run it, fades in, and then it'll fade out really fast. Hit F7. And if I do nothing else, immediately on the next frame, it will transition to the next scene when my movie plays. So if I look at my whole movie, we'll see how it immediately transitions. If I want it to stay black for a moment so our brain can process what we just read, we need to add additional frames here. So I can now just extend that out, frames of nothing. So now if we watch the text, it shows up on screen. If I decide that I need to leave it on screen longer, which I think I do, I'm going to select this group of keyframes and just pull it over, and then add a few more with F5 at the end. And now it fades out. So what we can do with this is, oh, that was great timing. When we produce the animation like this, we have quite a bit of flexibility of how we want our title to appear. When we do titles in Adobe Premiere, what we will find is we can either do basic fade in and fade out, or there's a bunch of title presets that we can use. And then they've done these graphic presets. What they did away with as of Premiere 2017, they did away with the standard rolling or crawling title text that you used to be able to do in the program automatically. They removed that functionality. They say, we might bring it back at a future date. It remains to be seen when or if that will even occur. So learning how to animate your own titles can be useful. So we start out, pops in, it pops out, a little bit of emptiness, and then it will go into the main movie. On to the credits, it will be same kind of thing, but some other items that we can do. If I go into my credit scene here and look at what is happening, I'm going to adjust my view, so I will choose fit in window so it scales it to fit within this window. If I were to, instead of using the text tool, I'm going to use the brush tool and paint my credits. I'm going to wait a couple frames. So I'm going to go somewhere around frame 20 or so. So I give it a little bit of time to be nothing. So when we go to the credit scene, there's a little bit of nothing. And now what I can do is, with my brush tool, if I write out my text, and now if I move to the next frame and I insert an empty frame but turn on onion skinning so I can see what was there, now what I can do is rewrite what I wrote the first time and repeat that a couple of times. And after I've got, probably 4 to 6 versions of this, trying to get them close, but they don't have to be exact. The more exact they are, the smoother it will be. The less exact they are, the rougher it's going to be. Because now if I look at what we see is we get this kind of shaky line. Oh, need to close that hole right there. And if that's enough, we can even take this, depending on how long I need it to be, this group of frames, I can just keep copying it throughout the timeline. But if I know I want this to keep going and I don't know how long it's going to take to animate the rest of my credits that I want to bring in, then what I need to do is probably convert these or add these frames into a symbol. So with the frames highlighted, what I can do is I can right click and choose copy frames. And now that I have done that, instead of modifying, if I look under insert, I have an option for new symbol. And I can just type in credits. And now right click in the timeline and choose paste frames. Now copying frames and pasting frames, when I try and do that, we will see that we do have keyboard commands for that, but we have to notice that they, instead of Command C and Command V, there's also the Option or Alt key that's part of it. But I prefer, just to make sure that I'm getting it correctly, I usually do it with right-clicking on that text. Now if I go back to the main timeline, I'm just going to add a new layer, and at this particular frame I'll insert a frame, and I will see that symbol that I made is now over here, and I can just drag that out, and the previous layer will just delete that. We no longer need it. But the good part is if I extend this out, add frames, because it is a symbol, we'll see how it just keeps animating without me having to do anything. So it will keep looping as part of it. So now I have credits here. The next thing I could do is I could add in, well, first I think I'll locate these higher up on the screen, somewhat centered. And now if credits appears, if I want text to appear, this is where I could either continue handwriting, which having some consistency might be useful, or I could use the text tool to put in more things. And it's also useful to think about when we're doing this is, again, how we play with timing. So I've grabbed the text tool. Fill color is going to be white. So I'm going to put animation by on one line. My next line. Give myself credit. And now that I have done that, I'm looking at both of these going, I think I want to make them smaller, so I can select them, go into my properties, and shrink it down. Now, if we notice, this is text. It's showing up on screen at the beginning. I don't want it there. I want it to show up later and to be staggered. So this layer is animation by. I want that keyframe to show up, maybe half a second after credits shows up, and then I'll have my name show up a little bit less time after that. Oh, there we go. I accidentally clicked the X to hide it. Pull this down. Now we'll adjust my name as it fits on here. So we can see we're controlling the appearance of those. And if I want to just end it after they've been on screen for a little bit, I could end all of them. But I personally would rather end one and a couple frames later end the next, and maybe a frame or two later end the next. So we stagger that. So when it plays, it doesn't all pop out at the same time. So it animates it out, giving it just a little bit more visual interest. Then we have some extra frames, and that wraps up the end of adding in some credits. So I have my three scenes, my title scene, my main movie scene, and my credits scene. Notice the credits scene I didn't start until frame 20, so almost a whole second in. So when this scene starts, there isn't anything. So it gives that pause from when the movie ends. Finish publishing on your project so we can see it in a final video form, because that's ultimately what we want to do. We have to export video. Not export movie. We're going to choose export video. When we choose export video, we'll see that there's a number of options that we can work with here. And by default, we can change any of these settings. If all the artwork was made inside of Adobe Animate, it is vector-based. So if at this point I wanted to scale up and say make it closer to full 1080 HD, I can do that. So I've made the width 1920, and then the height is 960, which means I'll have little black bars top and bottom, but I have a more cinematic view than standard 1920 by 1080. It's pretty close, but it will be similar to that. If you are exporting assets out from here and you want to have a transparent background on them so you can composite them with something else, say you wanted to export and bring it into Adobe After Effects, then if you didn't have artwork and you just had your stage color, whatever color it was, that would drop away and your artwork would then be rendered with a transparent background, and you would choose ignore stage color. We're not going to do that, so we will let ours stay as is. Convert video in Adobe Media Encoder. So we have two options. If I am done with my project and will not be adding additional transitions or titles or credits inside Adobe Premiere, then I want to convert video in Adobe Media Encoder. If not, I can uncheck that. So I'll just leave it checked and we'll see what happens. The next thing is to pay attention, where is it going to export and save this? So if I click on Browse, then I can go check the desktop so I know that it's going to put it onto the desktop. We'll see that it's outputting it as a .mov. That is fine. That's the only real option I have for this intermediate render. And then I will hit export. And then it's going to, the way that it works is it actually generates a SWF file, a .swf file, and then it's going to render out the .mov file, and then it launches Adobe Media Encoder. Media Encoder is how we can take our video files and convert them into other forms and formats or compressed files, whatever else we need. So as we do this, we will see that it shows the name of my file and what it is. It shows it's a 1920 by 960, 24 frames per second progressive video file. The audio is set to stereo at 44,100 hertz. And it also tells me how long my project is. It's 16 seconds and 4 frames. Now, it's exporting it into the H.264 codec, which is what we would want if we were making an MPEG file and we're going to be done at this point. And under Custom, this is where I'm going to click this button. And it launches this screen. Inside this screen, I will see format is H.264. If I click under format, you'll see we have lots of options that we could actually export our video into. And there's some of these are audio only formats. Some will be image sequence formats. Others are actual video format. We want H.264 because it's a good compromise between file size and quality. And then under the preset option, what I would want to then choose is scroll down and choose either Vimeo 1080p HD or YouTube 1080p HD. So I choose that preset. So it's going to export it out at a full 1080 HD video file. That's what I want to have as my finished project. Under Output Name, I click there. That gives me an option to pay attention to where it is saving. I will see that I created my intermediate format, my scene.mov file, and now I'll be making my scene.mp4 file. And I will show what the difference is between those and why that matters in a moment. The rest of the settings you can ignore. And then when you're all set, so you've paid attention to the name and where it's saving, your preset, and the format. So format H.264, preset YouTube 1080p HD. Output, you click there so you can name it and verify the save location, so you don't lose it after you save it and have to repeat this process. On a long project, that could be time. And then finally, I will hit OK. And after I've done that, absolutely nothing is going to happen until I go up into the top right corner and I hit the little green Start Queue button or hit Return on the keyboard. And I do that, and now we can see how it's rendering out this video file. And now it's done. It puts a little check mark in Adobe Media Encoder telling me it's done. The reason that we want to make the MP4, if I look at the MP4 file, I can see my project came out at 19.4 megabytes in size. If I look at the .mov file, I can see it's 577.6 megabytes in size. So the MOV file for my little 16-second animation is really, really big because it's not very compressed. It's a high quality output where the MP4 is a compressed video format that for the most part will look about the same, but the file size from 577 to 19 is pretty significant. To add titles, credits, transitions, or other things to our project in Adobe Premiere, what we are going to do is create a brand new project. So I am going to launch Premiere and choose New Project. When I do that, first thing I want to do is name it. So I've put in a name, and then I want to pay attention to where it's saving. By default, Premiere is going to save in the last location it was used on your computer. Your workstations will default into the user's Adobe Premiere version 8 folder, yet we're on like version 12 or something. So that's where it wants to go. Mine is going into this other folder. I'm not going to use that folder. I'm going to go to the desktop where I have a folder. Or no, that's not the folder I want. Here's the folder I want. I've made a folder. I called it Demo. I'm going to choose that. So name, location, and then I like to preset my capture format as HDV. It should come as standard now, but I like to set that. Then I hit OK, and it comes up with this window. Now when it comes up with my interface, we have a section for a timeline. If I have no timeline yet, that's because I have to make one. I have no assets in my project yet because I have to add those assets to my project. So we add our assets by going under File and choosing Import. And when I do that, I am then going to choose the .mov file that Adobe Animate exported. So mine created scene.mov, and I will choose Import. That's step one. While we're in Premiere, the next thing we want to remember is that we need to create a timeline. Timelines inside of Premiere are called sequences. So to make a sequence, we have a whole bunch of different ways we can do it. I can right-click in my project window and choose New Sequence. I can go File, hold down, New Sequence. We'll also see that it's Command-N. And I'm creating a new sequence. Now the type of sequence I want to create, you will see that there's a lot of presets. I want to choose HDV 1080p 24. So HDV 1080p 24 as my sequence settings. I don't want to choose DV, I don't want to choose RE or anything else. I want HDV 1080p 24. And once I do that, I can name it if I want. In this project, you will probably only have one sequence, so it's not really going to matter whether you name it or not. But it's a good practice to get into. So I've named it, and I will hit OK. And now that created a sequence, and I will now see in my timeline, it now shows me I have video layers and audio layers, and I see time code. It's critical when I drag my .mov file from my project window to my sequence. I'll drag it out, and we can see how it adds it to my timeline. When I do that, it's going to give me a warning. And it's a clip mismatch warning. It says this clip does not match the sequence settings. Change the sequence, and I want to use the default, which is keep my editing settings. I don't want to change it because I want the sequence to be at the size it is so that then my movie fits into it. And now when I look at my movie on the timeline, I'll see I have the little black bars top and bottom because the sequence is 1080p video, so standard 1080 video, and I am now putting my project onto it. So with the projects inside of Premiere, we can see that, hey, look, there it is. Now, we looked at how to do text and other things inside of Animate. Now, if I want to adjust how much time occurs, now I can see time is happening. Here's time code. If I want to play the project here in Premiere, I hit the space bar, and we can see 1, 2, 3. So we can see there is time occurring. So I just drug my movie out. It doesn't even start till frame 10 because I'm going to put some text here. If I want to put text on screen, let's see, we call it a demo movie. So I now want to put some text on screen. So I grab the type tool and then I will click inside my program window. And now it's waiting for me to type. So I've put some text on screen. Now that's an ugly font, and I'm going to want to put some fades on it and other things. So I now need to work with this text. To work with it, we need to modify it. And we're able to modify it with the text selected. The workspace buttons, I forgot that's how it changes it. I didn't mean to do that. But across the top we have our different workspaces. So if I click on those, it changes where the different windows are. I usually am in some version of the editing workspace where I now have my effects controls over here. And if I click on this text, we will see that I have my text present, and I can now choose different fonts. So I could now choose a font if I want to stick with Impact as my font, or perhaps for this one, what I really want is a real thin, clean font that I don't believe I have anything appropriate installed on the computer, but that will at least get me kind of close. So now I've put some text on screen. If I want to make it bigger or smaller, I can modify those settings. We can position it so it's nicely positioned on screen. So the effects controls are where we're able to modify the properties of this text element that we've created. To animate this is where we will need to then apply some transitions. Now one thing you will notice, it just auto-saved, so that's good. So it can auto-save what's going on. By default, if you add a text element, we can see that it adds it for 5 seconds approximately. So here's the text. It's on screen for about 5 seconds, and then we have my movie somewhere over here, and I can now adjust the timing on those as I see fit. But going back to my text, I want to apply an effect to it. Now, the effect I want to apply, if I click on the little double arrow, we'll see there's effects, or I can go under Window and choose Effects. When I do that, you'll see that we have different effects. And the ones we're looking at today, we'll see that we have transitions. Video effects we're not going to be applying, but we could if we wanted to put that on our animation. It'd be really weird, but you could. And under effects, we could be inspired by George Lucas and apply wipes. We could also do a standard, which would be dissolve. And now if I go to my text that is here, if I want to put a dissolve on this text, what we can do is grab the dip to black, and I drag that to the beginning, drag dip to black to the end, and then you will see that my text does a nice fade in, does a nice fade out. If I want to adjust the timing on that, I can just go right in the timeline, put my cursor over the end point of that effect, and drag it to make it shorter or longer. So it is that easy to do the effects. So if we're doing things that are more frame-by-frame style animation, with a little more pop, it's nice to do it inside of Animate. If I'm just doing a basic text where it fades in, fades out, it's much faster and easier to do it inside of Premiere because I can just drag that effect onto my element. And now we can see with that, I'll move my other element a little bit closer, leave a little gap of time. So we'll see as HTC fades out, then demo movie comes in, that fades out, then bird impact comes up, and as the project plays, bird hits the window, credits come in, credits pop out. Now the same way that we did the fade on the text, if our timeline were in pieces or if we had more elements, then we could even put the dip to black, drag it to the end of video clips. We could split this. We could put a fade in if we needed to. So there's a lot of flexibility and options that we can explore with this. But doing this basic fade in, fade out is generally much faster and easier inside of Premiere, and it can do it to text, but I can drag that same thing onto my project as well, but that's not really going to help when our project is, it covered all of that nice fade starting. So I can just click on it and hit delete. So if I don't want that fade, click, goes away. So let's see, we fade in HTC production. Then I think I will grab a wipe, and I'll just put a wipe on at the end. So fade in, wipe out, and then bring in the animation. So when you're done playing with all of your transitions and wipes and text inside of Premiere, then the next step is to export the project out, which is going to be a repetition of what we did in Media Encoder previously. To round out our journey of getting our content out of Animate into Premiere, now out of Premiere, with your sequence, so making sure that the sequence here is active. So you just click somewhere in that window, then go under File. I'm going to choose Export Media. Notice it's Command M. And when I do that, it pulls up the same window that we saw previously inside of Media Encoder. Now, apparently the last time this was used, it exported out as an audio file. So this time I'm going to choose H.264. And then once I do that, I need to change my preset once more. And under preset, I will choose YouTube 1080p HD. And then I will click on the name to verify where it is saving it. And look at what the name is so I know where it's going. Always do that. Don't just go through and then you're like, oh crap, where did it go? Because on a big project, it could take half an hour to render out, and then if you have to do it a second time because you didn't pay attention to where it went or what it was called, that really sucks. So I know the name, I know the preset, I know the format. Now if you don't choose H.264, you can't choose YouTube 1080 HD. So you have to choose H.264 first. And then after I've done all of that, then I will click on the export button, and it exports out my video. It's often fairly quick, but maybe, maybe not. And now I have completed that process. Going to the desktop, I'll see there is my video right here. I can double click on it. It opens it up inside of QuickTime, and I can hit play. Get the fade, we'll get the wipe, animate in, animate out, animate on screen. And we can see because I went from animate to the full-size video, all of my artwork is crisp and clean on screen. If I export it out at my native animate size and then scaled it in Premiere, everything would be fuzzy and pixelated and look like trash. So it's important to make sure that while you are in Animate and then you choose Export Video, you scale it up at this point to a full 1080 HD video size. So I chose again the 1920. Now we can see it's not quite tall enough, so we do get the little bars top and bottom, but it gives me that full width, and it scales it on the first render out of the video. And that will maintain my quality.